Welcome to Dialogue at EPlusTV 6, an opportunity to talk with Gene Davenport. He's written many works. The most recent is Though the Mountains Tremble, and its reflections on contemporary society. And Gene, and I hadn't thought about this, he's the former professor of religion at the former Lambeth University. So you've lived long enough now to be former of formers.
That's right.
And so all of that. And has done other work, and was at one time the residence, theologian in residence for St. Luke's, and also for the Methodist Church, or just at St. Luke's?
Well, he was at St. Luke's.
Yes. And so has had a column in the Jackson Sun for many years. Are you still doing that?
Yes.
Okay.
I get it out about 3 times out of 4.
Okay.
In terms of month.
You're one of the few columnists that has survived down there. Most have
Yes.
gone now. And so it's always good to visit with you. When you wrote this book, the title came from what?
Well, first of all, I need to say that it is a collection of editorials from the newspaper,
okay,
and commentaries. I did a radio program for about 4 or 5 years, and I did a commentary at the end of those. And then it has a few things that I did back when I first started at Lambeth that I thought were still relevant.
Still relevant, okay.
Yeah.
And that goes
but
back
the
how far?
title,
When did you start
The Mountains
When did you start at
Tremble,
Lambeth?
comes from the book of Psalms.
Psalms, okay. Though the mountains tremble, okay. In what context?
Well, though the mountains tremble, we will still be firm because God is with us.
Okay, all right. What gives you that faith? Because you're not fundamentalist.
Oh, no.
By any means.
And the us, I don't see the us as the United States, but the us as the church.
Okay.
And
God, right.
quite frankly, I think that the church today in the United States may very well have been abandoned by God,
Okay.
with except for some very faithful congregations here and there.
Okay.
And so it's in that sense that God is with us.
God is still with us. We go through these mixed things. It's interesting with the Barman Confession and other things out of that World War II experience in Germany and all that. The church, much of it was pro-Hitler in Germany, and you had some, Karl Barth and others, that began to say, this is not of God. I don't know what this is,
right,
but this is not of God, right? And so that we have a different calling. That is a challenge,
Very
right?
much
When
so.
your society reinforces certain religious views or things, or God is with us, speaking of the USA.
Well, very frankly, I didn't go to church for about 7 years,
Okay.
excepting when I was invited to preach here and there.
Okay.
Because I felt that when I would go to church, it just seemed to be a dead kind of place to be. They did the traditional songs and you heard the traditional sermons.
Okay.
But I just didn't think that it was the kind of liturgy, or to put it another way,
Right.
So many people go to church to see what they get out of it.
All right.
And to me, the church is, at least on the Sunday service, is where you go to worship God.
Right.
And we just got them going in wrong directions.
I remember the Bill Moyers interviews with Joseph Campbell that said the biggest mistake the church had made, and at that point it was changing the liturgy from Latin and then turning the priest back to face the congregation rather than going toward whatever, and not coming out of that tradition at all, and not being familiar. I had to think about that for a while because he said it's not about us, it's about, right? Yeah. And I thought, okay, and because there's a great line in one of the Elvis movies, Change of Habit, when Mary Tyler Moore is a Catholic nun, but they're on the streets and he doesn't know that she's a nun and whatever. And right at the end, when everything, and Elvis is going to sing in this church or whatever, and they're doing this contemporary service in this Catholic church, and the one lady in the audience turns to the other. It was one of the final lines of the movie. She said, "Take me back to Mass when you didn't understand a blessed thing." And so, but because there was a power in that, right?
Oh, yes.
I don't understand this, but this
Yes.
is this experience. It is reaching right
Well,
to
and one of the things that people saw a value in that was that no matter where you went in the world to the Roman Catholic Church, you knew you were going to hear the same thing.
Yeah, because there's a power in this. I think for those of us that come more out of Protestant orientations, that's just a difficult thing to,
Yeah.
you know, it's like, well, nobody understands this, so what's the point, right? Talk to me where I can understand it. And so a different thing. What changed it then for you to not go to church and then start attending again?
Very simple. I was doing my radio program, and there was a temporary priest at St. Luke's.
Okay.
And I had been to St. Luke's a number of times in the past at Advent and various times, but had not been in a number of years. And someone told me that there was a priest at St. Luke's that would be good to interview on my radio program.
Okay.
So I said, well, I never interview anybody without having heard them or talked with them. So one Sunday morning, I went down to St. Luke's just to hear her. And before the congregation was finished with the first song, I just felt to myself, this is where I belong. Now, I'm sure that you can explain a lot of that by the fact that some people are drawn to liturgy, other people are drawn to other elements of service.
Right.
And I grew up in a Methodist church. For years, until I went to high school, I attended a small rural Methodist church down in central Alabama. And it was very much like, you know, we had 3 different men in the congregation led the singing.
Okay.
And one of them would roll up one of these paperback hymnals.
Okay.
And this was the way he.
Okay.
Now, if you had given that man a baton,
Okay.
he would have been insulted.
Okay. With the hymnal.
But that was a baton he had. Yeah.
But it was the hymnal, and so it worked.
But that was the church I was baptized in.
Okay.
So I have pleasant memories of that congregation.
It resonates with you how and why?
Which?
The church that you went to as a young
The
a rural church in
I think it
in
was
central Alabama is not exactly where I expect
it was
to
the
find you.
interaction of the people.
Okay.
They loved the young people. They cared for each other, and even when they had, you knew that there were members of the congregation that would just as soon the other person not be there. That was not the dominant sense of the congregation.
Okay.
And strangely enough, I'd never thought about this. I'm glad you asked me this question, because I think it was the kind of openness and the kind of celebration that I heard there
Okay.
that today I hear in the liturgy.
Okay. All right. Gene Davenport is with us. His most recent work, not that we're talking specifically about that, but it's Though the Mountains Tremble. And it's reflections, and he does a column still that's published in the Jackson Sun. He's a thoughtful man. We appreciate the opportunity to talk with him, and we'll continue this dialogue right here at EPlusTV 6. Welcome back to Dialogue at EPlusTV 6, a conversation with Gene Davenport. For many years, he was the professor of theology at Lambeth University, and he says a former professor of a former university, and it's always good to talk with him. You'll see his work still. He does columns with the Jackson Sun, and he has written several books, the most recent, Though the Mountains Tremble, and Biblical Reflections on Contemporary Society, a collection of the columns, and then other reflections.
Yes.
You said some of those that you did when you first went to Lambeth, and you found them still to be relevant.
Well, actually, there is one in there that I decided to use when the students at what was the university in which the students were killed years ago.
Kent State.
Yes.
Okay.
We had a service on campus where the students gathered outside the chapel, and they asked me to address them from the steps of the chapel.
Okay.
And it just so happened that the guy who later became the editor and publisher of USA Today, who had been with the Tennessean,
Okay.
there I go, I'm horrible with names, but he was there.
Okay.
And I could never be quite certain whether he was just being friendly or whether he really meant it, but he had some very nice things to say after I did it. So, and it's a very long piece. And what it did was to say, primarily, don't think that the soldiers who did the shooting are ugly, violent people. And don't think that the young people who were revolting, don't think that they are just wild-haired radicals, that we're all in this together. Mm-hmm. And God's forgiveness for all of us is what's necessary.
Okay. It helps, I guess, with the perspective of time and the point of conflict. That's difficult.
Yes.
Right. Will Campbell, I think, was the preacher in Nashville with Waylon
yes.
Jennings and all those others.
Yes.
And he said he was at a civil rights protest one time and wanted to be there. He said the Klan was there, and then he said that he went over at a point, broke away, and went over and stood with the Klan. And you may have heard him talk about this. And people go, "All right, Reverend, what are you doing here?" And he said, reminding myself and reminding everyone that God loves bigots too. And it was like, whoa, that pushes me beyond what I want to be in political commentary and everything. Now it's like, that God is above all this, sees this thing from a totally different, because we want to get it down to good and evil. My side is good, your side is not, and here we go.
Will was an unusual man. Will was one of my closest friends.
Is that right? I didn't realize that.
And he was just an unusual man. And he saw that as one of his callings, was to establish ties with the Klan. Because, you see, he also had ties with all of the different movements that were just the opposite of the Klan, that the Klan were fighting against.
Right.
And nobody was fooled by Will. Okay. Everybody in each group knew that he was also on good terms with the other group, and they accepted him for what he was.
Okay.
I remember that the night that the Ku Klux Klan leader from the state of North Carolina, who went to prison, Will went to his home the night before he was to go to prison. And with some whiskey and loaf bread, they had communion together.
Okay, that's interesting stuff. Well, I remember hearing him talk about criminal trials and death penalty cases, which he was very much against the death penalty, was my understanding of his position, but that, that God is on both sides of this courtroom.
Yeah.
And we don't like to think in terms of that, right? And it pushes me. Right? If I've been a victim of crime or somebody and my family has been murdered or whatever, I don't want to think about God being on this side at all.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's like, that moves it beyond my comfort zone.
Yes, Will did. And I must say that although he was one of my closest friends, there were a few times that Will even pushed me beyond my comfort zone.
Well, he must have been pushing pretty hard.
But I would realize that what he was saying was actually correct.
Okay.
And we would talk about it a while. And, I think you can change your mind in a second. Okay. You don't change your feelings in a second.
Okay.
And eventually my feelings caught up with my mind.
All right. How are we doing today, Gene? It looks like to me that it's a struggle for us to get a perspective beyond just my passion, I'm going to blame it on the other side. It's their fault, not my fault, whatever. That it's tough for us.
Well, I think that's true because there's a strange, there are almost two currents working against each other. Not against each other, but in contrast to each other. There probably are more intermarriages today than there have ever been. And yet at the same time, there is probably the greatest separation between the black community and the white community today that there's been in years.
Okay. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because we don't have any white leaders today who are willing to publicly try to make take the step over
Okay.
You know, let me give you an example.
Okay. Because I would have thought once we got past George Wallace and Ross Barnett and all those other guys that we
Yeah.
would be coached.
Yeah.
Ironically, Wallace before his death reached out,
Right.
which was an amazing thing to
Yeah.
see. Yeah.
I used to ask the question, why do not more black Methodists attend white Methodist churches?
Okay.
And I thought, you couldn't ask a more racist question.
Okay.
The question is not why do not more black Methodists attend white Methodist churches, but why do not more white Methodists attend black churches?
Okay. Well, see, I talked to Darrell Coleman at CME Church, and his father was very much against, he said, the change from colored Methodist Episcopal to Christian Methodist Episcopal. If it is because this is what we are. Okay, this is our, and there was somewhat, he said, kind of this is paraphrasing, kind of a naive assumption in the 50s that this society was about to integrate. And our place is going to be, we're going to be a Christian Methodist Episcopal church. We're not going to be a colored Methodist. We're going to be a Christian. All the churches are going to be open. As it turns out, 6 decades later, CME Church is still a colored
Exactly.
Methodist Episcopal
Yes.
church, right? And so we're still doing this dance in some way, and
Yeah.
we don't seem to be able to get past it.
Well, and in the Methodist
And I
church,
thought about, just focusing on this racial thing among all the polarizations that are going on in our world, but this is a real one, yeah.
and in the Methodist church,
Well, in fact, in our community, we're having a call now for there to be black charter schools and other. Let's get back to
Yes.
black teachers and black coaches for black students and
Yes.
all this other stuff. It's just like, okay, what have we been doing for the last 60 years? I don't know.
yeah, well, and I think I think one reason for that, and with reason,
Okay.
I think that much of the black community has just given up
Okay.
on anything with the white community.
That integration
I will
was
say
an
something
illusion. Was integration an illusion that we chased? Was it naive?
Well, I wouldn't call it naive. I would say it was overly optimistic.
Okay. Hang on to that thought. Gene Davenport is with us. Though the mountains tremble, the most recent work that he has done, he's done many, and he's a thoughtful man. We appreciate the opportunity to talk with him. We'll continue this dialogue here at EPlusTV 6. Welcome back to Dialogue at EPlusTV 6 and a conversation with Gene Davenport. Though the Mountains Tremble is his most recent work, Biblical Reflections on Contemporary Society. Those are a collection of columns. You see his work if you're in the city in the Jackson Sun still, and appreciate the opportunity to talk with him. We also in this world, okay, are dealing with forces way beyond us, that are hostile to us and everything else that challenge us. And when you say us, and God is with us in this world, He is with His church, His body of folks, and that may not be in this country or
Well, I
whatever.
think he also is with the synagogue.
Okay.
I think he's also with the mosque.
Okay.
I think that God doesn't make as much difference between religions as we do.
Okay.
I don't mean that in any sense to say that I do not fully believe that the church is the community in which eventually all people will find unity.
Okay.
But until we reach that point, which I think is beyond history,
Okay.
then I think that we have to do the best we can with what we've got.
I remember it was Pope Benedict who met at one point, not only with, you meet with Anglicans and you meet with Jewish leaders, he met with Muslim leaders, making the point, and this is a conservative pontiff compared to others, that in an increasingly secular world, that the people that believe that God is and that God speaks will find that they have much more in common than they have apart as they confront a universe that's massive, secular, right? And that feeling of alone that the people of faith will find will quit killing each other one of these days, as we used to with Protestant Catholics. Took a few hundred years.
Yeah.
But we finally quit killing each other, go, okay, maybe there's something in common that we have here at Vatican II. And I've thought about that a lot, and I wonder if for people of faith in an increasingly huge universe that's so much bigger than we ever imagined, or when I was coming up, had no idea what that Hubble telescope was going to find all that stuff. And is that some sense that you have or share? Or?
Yes. And we have a group in Jackson that began probably a decade ago as was intended to be not more than 12 or 15 people that would be made up of Christians, Jews, and Muslims. And for the first 2 or 3 years we did that, and it was a good group. But then Muslim members, the Muslim members, some of them would come only once or twice and then not. The regular Muslims, one died.
Okay.
The other has had some problems that have kept him from being there. And at the same time, we have had come into the group people from other Christian groups, excuse me, from other than Christian groups who get into the mix. And then we also have had a sort of drop in the interest in the Jewish community. I'm still trying to figure out what the basis of that is.
Okay.
It certainly was not in the way people were treated at the meeting, because everybody was involved in the meeting.
Right.
But I think it's interesting that that goes right along with what you've just been saying earlier about the way that separation seems to be even more today.
Okay. It's almost like we're fatigued of this.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like I said, there was an expert. When I look back, it was almost like if we achieve integration in this society, if we break down the legal barriers, that there's no longer a white-only sign or whatever, that everybody is free to move anywhere, that there will be an integration of this society. That color won't matter. And it seems that everywhere I go, and in all communities, it matters. You know, and it's on both sides. And it's like, wow. We've been through this 60 years. I was intrigued that when Jackson Central Mary ceased to exist, the last year, that the students that dated that school went back to the Mary High School rather than the beginning of JCM. That whatever JCM was, when I go back and look at those yearbooks, where there was a black principal and a white principal and an assistant principal and balanced staff and all this, that we're going to make this work. We're going to break down, we're going to make this work. That, you know, that when it came to an end 40, 50 years later, that nope, it was Mary High School. In heart and center, and within the African American community. You're closing Mary High School again. And it was like, wow, I don't know, you know, what happens to us in this. How do we, and because we could apply this anywhere, and I take it this is what you do, that though the mountains tremble, God still is, and his people are still his people, right? And that we transcend or supersede this. How do we find that faith in the midst of all this? Because the pressure, even within the Christian community, is for me to take sides, right?
I guess I will sound like a Calvinist predestinationist now.
Okay.
But I'm not. But I do think that when I, as a human being, talk about finding God, I can never say I found God. I have to say God found me.
Found me?
And I don't tell anybody else that that's what they should say about themselves. But I really think that that is a sound theological principle, that God establishes community. I think he establishes his community for the sake of the whole world. But I think he establishes that community and gives it a task. And the task is not necessarily going out and pulling other people in. You will have other people who will come in. But the task is not to convert other people so much, in our day, I think, as it is to serve other people.
At the Jonas Kisber funeral, only funeral I've been to at the synagogue, Rabbi talked about it, and Paul Clayton spoke that day, that Jonas Kisber was a Democrat and a Jew in a town of Republicans and Christians, but that it never inhibited his relationship with them or their relationship with him. And it was like the footprint of faith is that quiet footprint. It's just, you know, in your family and your in whatever. And
well, Jonas was a good friend of mine.
And it transcends all this. And I thought, you know, because like I said, the thing is, well, have you joined my side yet? Right? And so it's like, and I've been thinking about that since then. And And I don't know, because I come out of a background when we got to convert you, Gene, or things are going to go amiss here, but the footprint of faith sometimes is a quiet one, and that's what makes the difference out there. You continue to be a man of faith.
Yes.
Despite everything that we see. Why? Or how? Or maybe God found you?
I have to say, somehow or other, God has kept me faithful.
Okay.
And I don't mean by, please don't understand that as perfect, as anything that would approach that word perfect in any area, morally, theologically, prayerfully, whatever. In fact, I know a lot of my sins that I'm not about to tell anybody. But when it comes right down to the nitty-gritty,
okay,
I think it is God who has kept me determined to see this through and to do what I can to help make it a better world.
Okay. Though the mountains tremble, the biblical reflections on contemporary society. She also wrote another book about the principalities and powers. What was that book?
That's a smaller little book that I did as a study book for the United Church of Christ.
Okay.
And it takes Paul's concept of the powers and principalities as transcendent powers and principalities who get us in their control. And then we act out. We become the instruments of the powers and principalities.
Okay.
And I believe that very much.
Okay. Certainly reasons to reflect. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it very much. Gene Davenport, I guess you find these Amazon and wherever, right?
They're on Amazon would be the best place to look for it.
Look for those. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. Stay with us here at EPlusTV 6. This is the place where the dialogue continues.